There is a certain quiet that follows people who were teenagers in the 1970s. Not a loud silence, more like the kind that settles in the room after everyone has gone home. It shows up in the way they pause before speaking, and how they listen more than they explain, and how memories seem to live just behind their eyes, waiting but never pushing to come out. They grew up in a time that no longer exists, yet still shapes them every day. And maybe that is where their psychology begins. They were teenagers before constant noise, before phones vibrated in pockets, before every thought needed an audience. If you were young in the 70s, your inner life mattered more than your outer image. There were fewer places to perform, fewer mirrors asking who you were supposed to be. You learned yourself slowly. Time moved differently back then. Long afternoons, quiet evenings, music playing in the background while someone stared out of a window, not knowing why, just feeling something. Teenagers in the 70s learned early how to sit with their thoughts, not because they wanted to, but because there was no escape from them. That kind of upbringing leaves a mark. Many of them remember feeling older than their age. Responsibilities came early. Emotions were expected to be controlled, not explored. Crying was private. Fear was swallowed. Confusion stayed unnamed. Parents were often tired, busy, emotionally distant, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. So teenagers learned to raise themselves in quiet ways. They learned how to read the room, how to sense when to speak and when to stay silent, how to take care of themselves without asking for much. That builds strength, but it also builds distance. One of the deep psychological patterns of teenagers who grew up in the 70s is emotional self-reliance. They don't easily lean on others, even now. They may have friends, families, partners, but inside, there is still that teenager who learned early that feelings were something you handled alone. So when life gets heavy, they withdraw slightly. They go quiet. They think. Not because they don't trust people, but because that is how they survived before. There is also a strange relationship with loneliness. Many of them were alone, often, even when surrounded by people, alone with books, with music, with long walks, with thoughts that had nowhere to go. So loneliness doesn't always scare them. What scares them more is emotional noise, too many words, too much explanation, too much pressure to feel something fast. They prefer depth, even if it comes with silence. Teenagers of the 70s lived through uncertainty without language for it. The world felt unstable. News came slowly but felt heavy. Conversations happened at the dinner table, not filtered through screens. There was fear, but it was quiet fear. Concern without constant updates. Worry without constant reassurance. So they learned to tolerate uncertainty. Even now, many of them can sit with unanswered questions longer than others, not comfortably, but patiently. Relationships for them often carry an unspoken weight. They love deeply, but carefully. They don't rush emotional exposure. They don't easily show vulnerability in dramatic ways. Instead, they show it through consistency, through showing up, through staying. And when relationships fail, it stays with them for a long time, not loudly, but deeply. There is often regret, not sharp regret, but quiet wondering. What if I had said more? What if I had asked for help? What if I had been softer with myself? They don't dwell on it constantly, but it surfaces in quiet moments, driving alone, standing in the kitchen late at night, listening to an old song that brings back a version of themselves they barely recognize. One of the hardest things for them is emotional translation. They feel deeply, but explaining those feelings feels unnatural. Words sometimes feel clumsy compared to silence. So others may think they are distant, or cold, or reserved. But inside, there is a full emotional world, shaped by decades of reflection. They were teenagers before self-expression became a skill, so their emotions stayed raw longer, unlabeled, unprocessed. This creates adults who feel things intensely, but quietly. They may not say, "I'm hurting," they say, "I'm fine," and mean something very different. Another subtle psychological trait is loyalty to the past. They don't chase trends. They don't reinvent themselves every few years.
They carry their younger self with them, sometimes too closely. Music from the 70s doesn't just sound good to them, it feels like home. It reminds them of who they were before life complicated everything.
Aging hits them in a particular way, not dramatically, but personally. They feel time passing, not through wrinkles, but through distance. Distance from people they once knew, from places that no longer exist, from versions of themselves that felt simpler, even if harder. They don't fear aging as much as they fear becoming invisible. Many of them struggle with being truly seen. They were raised to be strong, not expressive, reliable, not emotional. So when someone finally sees their inner world, it feels almost uncomfortable, but also deeply moving. There is resilience here, a quiet kind. They know how to endure without applause, how to adapt without announcing it, how to carry grief without asking for permission. But endurance has a cost. Sometimes they forget that softness is allowed now, that asking for connection is not weakness anymore. Teenagers of the 70s learned to listen, to people, to silence, to themselves. That skill never left them. Even now they notice things others miss, changes in tone, small emotional shifts, unspoken tensions. They may not comment on it, but they feel it. There is also a deep respect for authenticity. They distrust anything that feels forced. Overly polished emotions make them uneasy. They trust people who speak slowly, who pause, who don't oversell themselves, because that is how real life felt to them growing up. At times, they feel out of place in the modern world. Too fast, too loud, too performative. They adapt, but they don't fully belong, and that creates a quiet grief. Not bitterness, just a soft sense of being from another time. Yet there is also peace. They know how to be alone without collapsing, how to enjoy small rituals, morning coffee, evening walks, old songs playing quietly in the background. They find meaning not in excitement, but in presence. Their psychology is shaped by absence as much as by experience. Absence of constant validation, absence of emotional language, absence of instant comfort. So they built inner structures instead, some strong, some fragile. If you know someone like this, you might notice how they sit quietly in groups, how they choose words carefully, how they carry kindness without showing it loudly. They don't need to explain who they are. They already know. And if you are one of them, you may recognize this feeling, a sense that life has always been something to observe deeply, not rush through, a sense that emotions don't need to be dramatic to be real, a sense that silence can hold meaning. Teenagers who grew up in the 70s are not broken, they are layered. Their psychology is built from patience, restraint, and reflection. They learn to survive quietly, and later, to live thoughtfully. In the end, they carry a certain stillness with them. Not emptiness, not sadness, just depth. And sometimes, late at night, when the world finally slows down enough, that depth feels like home again.